Hello and welcome to the Hole in My Heart podcast. This is episode 227, Recovering Our Souls from Porn Addiction.
Yeah, we are going to recover our souls from porn addiction. If that is something that you have struggled with or a loved one of yours, we are going to talk about that. But welcome. We're coming at you from the WCSG radio studio. You can see it if you're watching on YouTube, and you can hear the studio if you're listening. Anyone
Sure.
else? Yeah, yes, maybe. But I'm your host, Lori Krieg, and I have alongside me my husband and favorite licensed therapist, Matt Krieg. Hello, Matt.
Hi.
How's today for you?
Things are going okay.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Steve Odell is on our other side. He's our friend and the most professional radio voice among us. Literally every guest comments on it because it's true. Steve, how are you?
I'm good. Hi, guys.
Now you're like, I'm going to squeak now.
I mean, I don't know that literally everyone has.
It feels like
but-
it's been at least 90% record. that
She was
they
saying
comment.
the figurative literal.
Oh, gotcha.
The figurative use of literal.
Oh,
The
okay.
millennial use of
Yes.
literal. But as I began to mention, we're going to be talking with a new friend of the podcast, Sam Jolman, talking about how to recover our souls from pornography addiction. This personally for me, Lori, has not been a personal journey for me, but it has been with Matt, and I don't know how our kids are going to be exposed and what that's going to be like, but we're going to talk with author and therapist Sam Jolman. He's talking about the sex talk we never got, and specifically, we are going to dive deep into, let's talk about that first pornography exposure. Is that your fault? Let's talk about the emotional aspect. Are you just an animal? Those are leading questions that I'm offering to you, but let's go ahead and get deeper. But first, let's talk about him.
Yeah,
with his bio.
Sam Jolman is a trauma therapist who specializes in men's issues and sexual trauma recovery. He received his master's in counseling from Reformed Theological Seminary and received further training through the Allender Center at the Seattle School of Theology and Psychology. Sam lives in Colorado with his wife and 3 sons.
Before we invite Sam on, I do want to remind you of today's sponsor, O'Neill Asset Management, who came alongside us, our friend Andrew there and his team, when we were like, money, huh? Retirement, that's inevitable? Question mark. What do we do with this? How do we save? Are we saving enough? So if you have similar questions, even if you've got bundles, fists, stacks of cash, Steve, I know that's how you're living.
Oh, yeah.
You're living amongst couches made of cash. So if you're living like Steve or living like Matt and I, you can reach out to O'Neill Asset Management, who are helpful and not judgmental. Bless. No matter how much money or little you got, hit up the link in the show notes. All right. Well, let's officially welcome Sam onto the show. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Matt, Steve, and Lori.
Yeah.
Good job.
Yes.
Got it all.
The dynamic trio.
Yeah, the dynamic trio.
Yes.
Let's hope.
Yeah, dynamic to an extent, yes. But let's get to know Sam a little bit more by asking the question of the week from last time, which is, Sam, what book are you semi-obnoxiously recommending to people these days?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I'm a chapter into Chuck DeGroat's new book, Healing from Within, and it is, I think, going to be that book. I'm still finding my way through it. It's not even out yet, but he's given me an advanced copy. But along with that, I would say The Anxious Generation
Yeah, dude.
by Jonathan Haidt. And just for its invitation to a conversation about really the formation of children. And we just freshly have a teenager for over the last few weeks. And so just stepping into the world of how to just formation for children. And I love his take so far on play and his invitation to what is really empowering to your children and how you raise them with a kind of self-confidence, self-empowerment. So that's been the read these chapters.
Yeah, I'll just jump in here because I also am going to say I've been obnoxiously recommending The Anxious Generation, and Tori Lane 05 on Instagram. She also said The Anxious Generation is so good. I read it and I like texted my whole family text, which I have 11 brothers and sisters plus in-laws. So when you text the family text, it's like 59,000 people. So I did it there. I've made like posts about it. We're literally going to do Lori's book club. Don't think I've even told anyone in this room about that. About The Anxious Generation, because I read a lot of parenting books this summer, and it just impacted me and literally changed the way I was parenting that day, where I can be absolutely talks about how we can helicopter parent in real life and not helicopter parent where we actually need to online. And he's like, they need to bump into stuff. So in real life, in order to become strong. And so that day I was like, okay, you could go around the block with your bike, which is sad to say, but it is true. I let them do more. So anyway, obviously, we're obsessed and obnoxious about it. I appreciate that book. Matt, which listener response?
Yeah, I liked what Joan had to say on Facebook, The Gift of Limitations. She said it's so good for anyone who feels limited or discontent by the hard things God has called them to do. And just the way she puts it, it kind of brought up the last conversation that we had with Eric about weakness and how God uses that weakness, and God is the strength in that weakness. And so I chose The Gift of Limitations.
That's great.
Okay.
Steve?
Well, I don't know exactly why this one's stood out to me, but Sarah on Facebook, first she said, a book, just one? But then she went on to say, I guess it would be Let My People Go, The Life of Robert A. Jaffray by A.W. Tozer, which I thought I could impress people by saying I'm reading Tozer.
Yeah,
but then she went on to say it's short, brilliant, amazing. So I'm like, oh, it's short. So I could get
short sounds great.
Exactly. Right.
Oh man, I love your responses. I want to go and read all of these. I wish I could. But if you guys want to take part in these questions of the week, you can find the hole in my heart. Did I almost say hole in my head? It's possible. Hole in My Heart podcast Facebook group. You can ask to join there, answer a couple of questions, just so I know you're not super creepy. And then on Instagram, you can follow me there, and I just post it to my stories, and would love to hear your answers there as well. Sam, let's ask you the hearty questions now. We ask every guest this: if the part of the gospel is we are more sinful and flawed in ourselves than we ever dared believe, yet at the very same time we are more loved and accepted in Jesus Christ than we ever dared hope. When was the gospel first good news for you, and how is it still today?
Well, my goodness, my invitation into that, right? Overwhelming mercy and the scandal, really, of the gospel, right? Was literally like a mile from where you're sitting. If you're sitting at the WCSG studio
on Cornerstone's campus.
That's amazing. So I went to Grand Rapids Baptist High School around the corner.
What? Which is North Point now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now North Point. Yeah. Yes. Indeed. Back when it was old school. And but up the road at Sunshine Church, I remember sitting in a car with a girl that I was very interested in. And she started asking these questions. I grew up in a Christian home, but it felt like the thing I had too much of, and was always wanting to, expel, like, get me away from this stuff. But there was something about the invitation to a deeper conversation. She just started asking questions about life. And I don't know, the Spirit in that moment awakened something in me to like, whoa, there is a deeper way of being curious about life that drew me to God and lit something up in my heart. And then went to Calvary Church around the corner, and to everything that this intern at the time, Rob Bell, was teaching. And met in Rob a passionate Christian who took everything that was said seriously. And I fell in love with Jesus through that journey.
I love it. For those of you who are just either waiting to turn off the podcast now because you said, he said Rob Bell and Lori agreed. She said he was great. I actually went to Mars Hill for the first years. I still remember some of his sermons before he kind of seemed to move more towards universalism. But at the beginning, man, it was foundational stuff for me too when Rob was preaching.
There's so much God was doing in that community in terms of people finding Jesus from wild stories. And yeah, it's great. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
So the book, the sex talk you never got. Why this book? What was the inspiration behind it?
Yeah, well, I think I bring a couple things. Just my professional experience. What finally led me to write the book was sitting as a therapist with men and couples, but primarily hearing from men. The only way they knew how to think about sexuality was sinning or not sinning. Is it lust or not lust? Am I behaving or not behaving? And understanding there was this deeper conversation of things that had shaped them, parts of their story, ways of embodying their sexuality, and that they almost didn't have a category for how to talk about or enter into. So primarily that of like, man, we need a better way to talk about masculine sexuality. If God made this a good thing in the world, what's the good? And in the wake of the Me Too movement and the Church Too movement, and just hearing the obvious pain in the world, as the fruit of masculine sexuality as well, I felt like, man, I think the world was asking, is this just fundamentally broken? And men, is there another way that you can be a healthy and good sexual man that isn't violating to the world? So, and obviously knowing the Christian story that God blessed Adam and the way he had made him in the garden as good, I knew that there must be a vision for sexuality that was more than what we were obviously seeing in something like the Me Too movement. So that's what finally kind of kicked me over the edge. But obviously, as an author, I bring my own story to this book of my own ache as a young man, and my wife and I in our young marriage finding such difficulty of embodying well our sexuality, and how do we move towards each other and sort of dance well sexually, and finding, man, there were parts of my story that I hadn't addressed that were showing up in marriage and my own struggles. And anyway, that sense of, I had that myself as a young man in mind as well, of like, what would I have wanted to hear that might have helped me, I don't know, sooner, faster, with less shame. So that's those things I would say shape me.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, some of what you're talking about, like with kind of this vacuum that we navigate sexuality with, especially as guys, like we hear the I guess the overt messages of maybe the world that like, this is something that you should be doing. If you're not, you're weird. That it's like purely seeking personal pleasure and all this kind of stuff, not violating people. Like that might be the one stipulation in the world's eyes. But there's just so many messages that we receive from all sides as we're growing up. And I can think of some of the most profound and awkward conversations that I've had in the therapist office, where it's like a 17-year-old kid with their mom and their dad really navigating some of these messages of like, what do you believe about sex and sexuality? What do you profess and what do you actually live out? And so you've worked with a lot.
You're asking the parents? You're asking the kids?
I'm asking all of them.
Oh, snap.
I'm asking the parents to do a deep dive into like what formed your sexual belief system. Like what do you assume about your kid and the different world that they're growing up in versus where you grew up in 30 years ago. And it leads to some very awkward, like there's a kind of deer in headlights look for people at first, but like once people start to break open, it leads to some really good conversations. But I guess in your work, with the number of guys that you've worked with, like, what are some of the messages? What are some of the like barriers, I guess, that you're seeing that make it just really difficult for men to step into like a true God-given sexuality?
Yeah, at one level, the same thing you're inviting your clients to face, which is, again, maybe let me back up and say, that barrier that they kind of have to break through to start the conversation is this. I think at some level, this should just work, right? There's so little conversation that men have had around sexuality, women too, I would say, but thinking of the men, like, most men have not had many meaningful conversations around their sexuality. Maybe they got kind of a basic, often incomplete anatomy lesson of how does the plumbing and the mechanics of sex work? And then quickly a purity lecture, right? Like, don't screw it up. And if you have any questions, let me know, right? If you got to talk, it probably was something like that. And the message is, right, this should just work. And when it doesn't, right, even mechanically, 85% of couples will experience some sexual dysfunction over their married lifetime. So even the plumbing doesn't work as, right, it just should work.
Right.
And so, what are you left with then if the implication is this just works, we don't really need to talk about it? It's this world of shame, right? If you're in a community where there are things that we just don't talk about, you inherently know those things have some sort of shame to them. Mm-hmm. So already, right, the absence of meaningful conversation sets up this sense of shame. And I need to bury this, or at least, where do I go to even talk about this? So I think this implicit shame sets men up. Maybe they get locker room talk or sex jokes, but nothing that's vulnerable. So, I sit with a lot of guys that will say something like, oh yeah, there's some weird things that happened when I was a kid. Huh. Or I plan to take this to the grave. I don't know why I'm telling you. And this sense of starting to enter into stories that they maybe even felt, damned them as being a monster or weird or perverted, right? That are really stories of sexual harm. Wow. Most men's story of being introduced to pornography is a story of harm.
Right.
Meaning somebody else is bringing it to them.
Wait, I need you to say that louder for the people in the back. Because I think a lot of men, Allender says it, Stringer says it, you're saying it, we need to say it louder. I think a lot of men and women do not see their first pornographic exposure as violation. Can you just go there for a second? Because yes. I think that could set people free.
Yeah, so, if somebody... You have no capacity to know what's coming,
right?
If you've never experienced pornography, so you have no capacity to consent, and you're a kid. You have no, even if you knew what it was, right? You really have no idea what this world is of pornography, and so for somebody to introduce it to you, often there's an invitation, sometimes out of that person's own arousal, right, or own desire to sexualize you. I'm not saying that's always present, but to suddenly have such material, your body awaken to something, but no category for what you're experiencing, right, is violation. And, that can be significant. I tell a story in the book about a man who had some older boys pin him down.
What?
To make him look, right? And then they laughed and walked away. That man whacked in my office decades later because of that moment when he began to recognize I had said no, and they forced me to look. Or I tell a story in the book of a 14-year-old who innocently had heard some friends at school talk about girls they were interested in. And he realized with fear, I don't know how to kiss a girl. And so he went to Google
Right.
out of his shame of like, these boys are talking about girls and I'm terrified. I wouldn't even know how to kiss a girl. And so he Googled how to kiss a girl. And what popped up was pornography.
Right.
And I mean, this young man eventually told his parents what world had opened up to him. But again, even that, right, is an assault on this young man's innocence. There are pornographers, right, who are obviously looking for their next customer. And they're showing up in search engine optimization. Right. So even there where it would seem like, well, nobody's in the room, right? Isn't it just this boy's own sin? No,
right.
That is at some level evil, harming this young man. Or, you know, a young man who told me a story of finding his dad's pornography.
Right.
When, you know, the bathrooms were full in his house from all of his siblings. And so he went to his parents' bathroom, which was supposed to be off limits, right? But he really had to go. And so he went as a boy into his parents' bathroom and discovered his father's pornography. I mean, that is neglect that led to harm, even though there was no one in the room. You know, we think of sexual abuse as some form of, you know, molestation. And certainly that is sexual abuse, but there are other forms, including this one.
Okay, dudes in the room, I, by the grace of God, have never like intentionally sought or come across pornography. I know I'm like the sexual sinner girl, but that's not been an issue of mine. And so I don't have lived experience of this. So I know Steve and Matt, you guys have talked about this openly. That's been a part of your stories. What's what Sam is saying doing to you guys right now?
Well, yeah, I mean, like I can talk about the time in third grade walking home from school with a bunch of guys, and one said, yeah, let's stop by my house for I don't know what the stated purpose was, but we ended up in the basement and this kid's dad's collection was brought out. So yeah, like very much I can relate to the scenarios you're describing. And that's pre-internet. I can't imagine with how prolific it is with the internet.
Do you see that encounter as like assault on you?
No, I mean, I don't think I would have characterized it that way. I think I would have, I don't know. I think I know that something began there, you know, but I don't know that I ever would have characterized it as, you know, assault or, you know, something like that.
You don't need to do therapy right now. I'll move on to Matt. Go ahead, Matt.
Well, I mean, I think that question, it's hard. Like when you're exposed at 10, 11 years old, some kids a lot younger than that, like I'm not going to say it's a sexual assault in the sense of like physical being accosted and everything. But to me, like at here now 39, like I don't know what my heart would be if I was never exposed to that. And so in that, I liken it to like calluses on your hand. Like this was a callousing effect on my heart, but it's something that I've lived with, and I don't have any recollection of what it's like to live without.
But have you grieved, like what Sam is saying? Like, have you been able to be like that? Because for you, it was a swimsuit calendar, and like the dad was like, "Yeah, you want to take it home and like look at this," and your parents were like, no. Like, have you? I'm sorry, I'm making you guys do therapy right now. Have you grieved that as like that was not my fault?
I feel like I grieved some of that, but I think more it was like the parental response, which was just a no, we don't do that.
Without any.
And then there wasn't like the follow up of I'm sorry, like that you saw this or that this is kind of what was presented with you. There was no further conversation, you know. And then my friends followed up with here's the calendar, here's all the images in thumbnail size that fit on one sheet of paper.
It was the 90s.
You know, it was the 90s, and so I feel like I grieve the fact that there wasn't kind of that parental follow up and like.
Yeah, somebody telling you that was not your fault.
Yes.
That was wrong done to you, you know?
Yes.
Sam, okay, help us, please. Will you help
Yeah.
what should a parent do? What could have been pre or post? What are you thinking?
Okay, so let me just give a backdrop for the word assault, because people might be like, what?
Yeah.
You're saying this is like sexual assault? What? That's crazy, right? That might feel like, what are we accusing these other boys walking with you in third grade of being, a rapist? What,
Right.
Again, but let me give the backdrop of Genesis 2 and 3, right? We have a false delineation of chapters, right, in chapters and verses, right, and they help us navigate the Bible. But if you think about how Genesis was written, right, Genesis 2 ends in this glorious Adam and his wife were naked and they felt no shame, and it feels almost like a curtain closing, right, of like, wow, the erotic goodness of that moment for them. They had found their people, and they're naked and no shame. I mean, there is nothing that is encumbering their innocence and aliveness. And then chapter 3, now the serpent was more crafty than all the wild animals, right? And if you read that, it can almost feel like two separate scenes, right? Like, well, the curtain closed, and then later, and maybe it was, but if you read it without the chapter divisions, Adam and his wife were naked and felt no shame. Now the serpent. I mean, how quickly evil came to assault their naked innocence. And I would say evil hates your sexuality. And so as a parent, to understand, evil hates the sexuality of your children. It does not want you to be alive and well in your sexuality.
Yeah.
Nor does it want that for your children. And so, because if you are alive and well, our sexuality mirrors so much of our hearts as lovers and worshipers of God. And they're distinct things, right? But it spills into so much else of our lives. There's so much connected to our sexuality, our sensuality, our awe, our wonder, our innocence. And evil hates that. So you have to come to recognize that at some level, evil wants to come early in all our stories to join our sexuality to shame, right? What was the fruit of evil's assault on Adam and Eve? Shame.
Right.
They recognized they felt naked and hid, right? That suddenly that aliveness and freedom was joined to shame and shut them down. Because what do we all do when we feel shame universally? We hide.
Away.
We cover up. So, as you say, like, what can we do as parents? I mean, start with recognizing evil wants to come early to join shame to sexuality and get us to surrender our innocence. And then within that, how do you address it? I think, Matt, what you named so well is some conversation that would fight the shame against that moment, and not to shame your children for sexual curiosity or sexual intrigue or questions, or even ways in which something awakens them sexually, right? That's not the problem. It's more the relationship around it. So again, just having that lens, I think, is a hugely important first step.
And it sounds like, too, in order to be able to not shame our kids, we would need to do some preemptive foundation laying of, what we are saying with our kids. They're 10, 8, 5. It's there's a little kid's book called Good Pictures, Bad Pictures. I'd recommend reading it, but even if you just get the sense, and you guys can teach this to your kids. Hey guys, there's good pictures, there's bad pictures online. Did you know that some people, they put pictures of private parts online? What? Are you kidding me? Yep. But if you guys come across that, you will not get in trouble. This is what I say. I don't know if this is the right thing to say, but this is what I'm saying right now because I read this somewhere. I'm just trying it out. You will not get in trouble if you come across that. you might get in trouble if you don't tell me. That's one thing. I'm not signing that with the Holy Spirit signature. But I was like, they're like, oh, we're not gonna get in trouble. I said, if you see it, you come and tell me. You shut it. You come and tell me, and you are not gonna get in trouble for that. So that's my preemptive strike, so that then we can have these conversations about how normal it is, what might have stirred in their bodies, similar to abuse. I have been abused,
Right.
and that's confusing too if you've been sexually abused, because your body does get aroused, and then you feel the shame. All right, I just said a lot. What are you thinking, Sam?
Yeah, I love what you're setting up there, because you're honoring space for conversation.
Yeah.
You're not going to be shamed for this.
No.
Right? Like, it is natural to be curious about sexuality.
Right.
It's natural to be intrigued even with other bodies in a way that is curious. And so to be able to have space for what awakens in you or what awakens in your children, and to honor that's not evil, that's not sinful inherently, and to be able to talk about it. What are the boundaries around that? Of course, is important, as you said so well.
Right.
Like, what is the context that this was made for? Is important, and that bodies are sacred, and that feels important. That what's happening in the body is not shamed.
Right. It can turn into sin if they start going to, keep returning to this space or turn into this ritual. So I'm praying about where to go right now. And I think we need to help people who feel caught. They're like, great, well, maybe that first time that I encountered this that was an assault, but here I am, 35 years old, male or female, and I'm addicted, Lori. Maybe they can admit it or not, but they're like, I'm stuck. This is the facts of life. So we're already setting this up like, hey, let's try and remove some layers of shame. But can you kind of like get under the hood a little bit further and help us understand why, even if we understand that wasn't great first thing, why do we keep coming back to this space over and over?
Yeah, great question. So I would say two things seem to pour into that. One is, as I say in the book, I'm convinced that pornography use as a ritual and masturbation is primarily rooted in soothing something within you, and primarily an anxious nervous system, some sort of emotional regulation. And that might seem strange at first to think about, but it's, I think we get this false idea that it's just an overabundance of sexual desire and it's got nowhere to go. Right. And so, I looked at pornography. I'm too sexual, and I would say, no, that's primarily not what's probably driving you there. It's most likely that you are trying to soothe something within you that is dysregulated, meaning there's probably something in the moment that overwhelmed you. And it might not be clear at first what it is.
Right.
But something in you is not well, and you're attempting to bring some sort of soothing. And masturbation, the release of the endorphins and relaxants that happens in orgasm, can bring a kind of body regulation, but it's not really connection that you're making with what's going on inside. So it's actually not integrating you, though it might give you a temporary feeling of release for whatever you're feeling. So there's something in the moment. So I always ask clients, like, but what was happening right before you felt a pull to look?
Yes. I love this question.
So you have to be curious about what was the context, because it might feel like, well, nothing. It just was there in my body. No, wrong. It wasn't.
Wrong
You
answer.
might not be tuned in to that, but you've got to check in with what was the context. What happened an hour before, in the day, 10 minutes before? Something triggered you to want some sort of soothing within. So start there. The second thing would be, you've got to be curious about what you're looking at. And that might seem strange at first too, of like, well, isn't that what I'm trying to forget? Right? I'm trying to get, Jesus, cleanse my mind,
Right.
Get me away from this. And I would say, well, don't waste your sin. Be curious about it. I think the gospel invites us to curiosity about what we do and why we do it. And that, as Dan Allender has said, even in our worst sin, we cannot eradicate our glory. Meaning there is something of the image of God, something of a real desire being present in what you're acting out. And so, most people don't type porn into the search engine. They type specific words. Or I think one website, common pornography website, has like 700 years worth of videos, which is staggering. Don't quote me on that, but it's something like that. Like they're measuring it in years and maybe even tens or hundreds of years worth of videos. So, and you think you've got, in other words, that much to choose from. What are you clicking on? That's a clue to something deeper in your story and what you're looking for. So if I can tell a story, as I tell in the book, and this is a bit of a made up story of a client, but bringing together a couple real men. One man was driving home from work and his wife texted him and said, I've got some things for you to pick up from the grocery store on your way home. So he picks these things up. He gets home. He forgot something. She's frustrated. It was for the meal. That frustration triggered him. Though he didn't fully know it at the time, later that night, he looked at pornography. He comes into counseling, and this is a client that had come in for a while, so this was somewhat of a familiar ritual, but he confesses, hey, I looked at porn again. And he feels the guilt and the grief of that. And so I start to ask him the same questions. What was going on? And so he tells me this story and the fight with his wife about forgetting the stuff. And then I ask, what did you look at? And he sits back for a second and he says, if I'm honest, I think what I was looking for is a woman with a really genuine smile. Oh. And tears. And that was this huge door into this man's story, both obviously about what he wanted from his wife, her smile, but also this big story about how he had ached for his mother's smile. And the only time he got his mother's smile is when he was giving her back rubs and listening to her heartache about his father. So you start to hear there's so much behind what he was acting out. And again, am I saying that's okay? No. Right? Obviously, we're seeing he could have gone to his wife and said, honey, I'm sorry. But I don't want this to come between us, right? Like, I want your smile. I want you, how can we make it right? To work it out, to repair with his wife. But so I'm not saying in any way that was a good place to go. In fact, it brought further harm and shame to really good desires in him that he needed to find a different way with. So that would be a bit of a picture of some of the work that I think needs to happen around that ritual in your life.
Yeah. Well, and I think, and this story kind of exemplifies it. And one of the hardest things to get people to realize is that pornography use and sex is not about sex. There is always an emotional component. And if you don't understand that, and so if I do that same kind of process of getting people to come to like okay, well, what is the narrative? What is the story that you're looking for? What is the thing? The smile from his wife. A lot of people will have this reactive response of, well, isn't that just making excuses for my behavior? And it's obviously giving insight into the behavior, but it's also something that if you don't understand it, you can't make a different choice, you know. And in understanding that, and understanding, well, what I really want is that affirmation for someone to tell me that I am good even when I make a mistake, you know, or don't follow through perfectly. If you're never aware of that, if you're never actively looking at it, you're just going to follow this well-worn path to the same things you've always gone to.
Right.
You know, and so like identifying the emotion isn't making excuses for behavior. It's actually identifying where freedom from that behavior can come from.
Well said. Right. And beginning to understand it's not just, oh, it's just lust. You know, I just, you know, just
Every
felt
man's
too much
battle.
sexual desire. But like it was the contempt, obviously, as you're naming well, for himself, right? Pornography is not an honoring place for his hunger, and the contempt for his wife of, I won't come to you to repair. I won't risk on your heart that you will give me your smile again.
Yeah, I feel like, you know, talking about bouncing your eyes and in recovery we call it white knuckling, you know, just basically focusing on behavior on the surface. I have a question in here somewhere. Is, you know, it's not ever going to like really address what's really going on, because it's only addressing the external. And so I guess my question is, when someone has ritualized or kind of habituated this behavior to where it's almost automatic after a whole day of I'm gonna, you know, do what's expected of me because I've got this almost like carrot out in front of me, this thing that is my reward, I guess, for you know, being a good guy throughout the day. Like, how do you help someone who has become so habituated with it to actually see the connection, the emotional connection to the behavior when, you know, they're not conscious of it anymore?
Right. Yeah, well, I would start with saying it's never just a habit. So you aren't that animal.
Right.
And so you might think, oh, it's just my thing, and I did it again. And I would say it always has a story to it. Always. Even if it feels easy, there's always something that is shaping that moment for you, and always something meaningful, because you're just way more complex as a person than an animal. And so, you know, maybe what you need to repent of is, I'm just an animal who has a habit, a bad habit. I would say, no, you're not. You're the image of God. You're the glory of God. And as I say in my book, you are a lover. You are made for such incredible capacity. And so beginning to understand this isn't just a habit. Something is triggering it in you, and it might be easy to choose, and it might feel like, well, it is a habit, right? I do it all the time. Okay, but still beginning to ask questions about it. And what is the ritual? You're getting something out of the ritual more than just, again, this physical release. And I would say, you know, that's one way that we've diminished men, and I would say even over-sexualized men, is that we've reduced them down to, you know, well, men just want sex. The emotional stuff is for women. And, you know, just give a man food and sex and he's good, right? Like there can be these really diminishing statements about men. And it's true that, you know, on a bell curve, men have more desire than women, but marriage to marriage, that's not true. And it's not like it's extremely all or nothing. And do men just want sex? No. As you said, Matt, there's always something more than just the body function happening, right? There's what are you getting out of it? What are you bringing to it? And I have men confess in my office, like, I feel like I'm the woman in the relationship because I like the emotional stuff. Or, you know, I know as a man, I'm supposed to just, you know, always be ready and always just ready to go. And yet, like, I need the connection. I want that. So just beginning to understand it's not just, again, well, I'm a man and, guys, boys will be boys. I think all of that just really diminishes men. And in some ways excuses them, obviously, as well. But I would want to say it's actually diminishing you. You are a lover. You are the image of God. You are made for such incredible capacity for love and connection, including sexually.
Can you land the plane with us today, offering hope to men and women who feel trapped by the chains of pornography addiction? Can you just give them a word of encouragement?
Again, I would say somewhere evil is naming you. I don't know if that's pervert, weirdo, monster. I don't know what words you say to yourself in your struggle, but I want to invite you to begin to turn the table on shame. That God's kindness is through and through what he wants to offer you. Jesus saved, I believe, some of his kindest, most compassionate conversations for the sexually broken, oppressed, sinful. He was so tender with them. And he has that same tenderness for you. He doesn't want to roar at you. He wants to talk with you and be curious with you. And you cannot fundamentally destroy your capacity to return to your original glory. Amen. You cannot destroy the design of your heart to be a lover. So even if you feel like I'm such an addict, I am such a weirdo, I'm so perverted, I would say you're not perverted enough that you've destroyed the image of God in yourself.
Dude, yes.
And there's always hope to recover that. So I'm inviting you to turn the tables today on that voice of shame, to be curious with God about what might be going on deeper for you.
Amen.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sam. Man, so guys, his book is The Sex Talk You Never Got. Google that. It will bring you to his site. It will bring you to safe things, and you can order it on his site. You can also follow him on Instagram. We're going to link to all of these things online. But Sam, thanks so much for engaging us in this space. I'm sure it helped at least one, if not thousands of people.
Thank you. It's been such a rich conversation.
Well, as we wrap things up, I want to give another shout out to O'Neill Asset Management for sponsoring us today. They have been a burden remover for us as we think about our finances, which I never want to. It's just how I am. Matt wants to. And so it's nice to have a third party to give you a wisdom. If you would like a free, non-judgmental, complimentary analysis of your finances, visit o'neillassetmanagement.com. It's also in the show notes. Matt, Steve, this is a long episode, so we got to do it quick. What stood out to you? We'll start with Matt.
Yeah, I mean, so much was resonating just as he was talking about that, the need to go into understanding our stories, our sexual stories, the emotions, especially associated with, some of the more negative sexual behaviors that we might pursue, and just trying to remove that shame, because that shame breeds isolation, which leads you right back to porn, and it's a vicious cycle.
Yep.
So I really appreciated his stance.
Yeah, similar. I think just that having that curiosity with God, and that God can use our sin to answer deep questions. So anyway, that was just one thing.
It just makes me think of when I talk with our kids about suffering they've endured, and I say, God plants seeds in garbage, and he can make it grow. So it's not that we want to live in garbage, but I loved Sam's exhortation that you cannot diminish God's plan, his will, or the image of God on you. So that's what I'm taking, and I want to pass along. We have a question of the week for next time. Mullets. Yes or no? Mullets. That's right. I'm talking about the hairstyle because they're in vogue. Maybe they're actually maybe on their way out. But our 5-year-old son his hair cutter, his barber was like, come on, let me give him a mullet. And he ended up saying no for now. But I'm just curious, guys, are you for it? Yes or no? I think we're going to get impassioned responses. Steve, you going to rock one out next week?
I don't think so. I don't think so because, I lived through the late 80s, early 90s. I think I've done my time with the mullet.
Matt Krieg, I know. I have photo evidence of your time with the mullet.
Yeah.
What's your opinion now?
I'll have to mull it over.
No.
There's some more thought on that one.
Of course.
All right. We want to hear your answer again. Hold My Heart Podcast Facebook group or follow me on Instagram. I'll post it on my stories. If you guys like the podcast, you're welcome to rate and review it. We'd love to hear from you. It helps other people find it. If you love it, you can sponsor it. So hit me up at podcast@lorikrieg.com. Thank you again to Sam Jolman for joining us on the podcast today. Thank you to WCSG for hosting us. Big shout out to the Zach of all trades for doing the video and audio, and for all of us here at the Hold My Heart Podcast. We'll see you next time.